Hey programmers, welcome back to Software Developer Diaries, and today we have another episode of Node.js Security Best Practices number 2. If you haven't seen the very first video yet, go check it out, it's in the same playlist. The thing is, I think security is a pretty important topic, so you don't want to miss, or rather you want to cover as much theory as possible. And with that said, let's start with the very first point that we have here, which is running Node.js as a non-root user. You see, whenever you start Node.js in your local environment, you're probably starting it with the user that you logged into your computer. But in cases where you're running a Docker container, let's say, or even if you're logging into your EC2 instance, some kind of a cloud machine, and then start Node.js, you're most likely starting your Node.js process as a root user. So imagine a root user is here, and let's call it a root user. The problem is Docker machines like this usually have a root user defined by default, meaning they're going to run as a root user. And what is bad about it? Well, the thing is, if a hacker gets a hold of this root user, because the Node.js server is started with a root user, let's say the hacker gets hold of this Node.js server, and then they have access to the exactly same things that the root user has, meaning they can wipe out the whole disk, they can remove all the data, they can even redirect the incoming request to their own server somewhere outside. So the results are pretty catastrophic, and you don't want this to happen. So what would you do? Well, the thing is, especially if you're using Docker, you're most likely already using a predefined image from Node like this. And Node already ships an auxiliary user that you can use just simply by defining this line user node, and then your privileges are limited. Meaning if a hacker somehow gets a hand of this Node.js server, they still don't have root user access to the whole machine, which is good. All right. So keep this in mind and be careful with your users when you're running your Node.js process. Okay, the next point is module loading with a variable. This one is pretty interesting, and I would say it's an edge case, but it's something to really keep in mind. For example, if you're doing some lazy loading, or if you want to load some kind of file from your server based on the user's input, let's say you literally have a prompt here. Let's say you have an input field where you can let the user to specify some kind of a text, all right? Let's say load whichever file you want, and the user can call the file name XYZ, and you're gonna go and fetch this file from your server. This is pretty dangerous, okay? The thing is, within Node.js, you would do something like this. You would require a helper path is basically the path that the user defined, and then a hacker can actually misuse this. They can literally read the files that they're not supposed to read. That's why always make sure that your path where your request files are always kind of hard code. So you give no chance to the user to specify which files you want to load. All right, keep this in mind. Okay, let's go to the next point, which is limiting the payload size. So we already talked about rate limiting in the previous video. Again, go check it out if you haven't heard about it. Rate limiting is where you are basically restricting how many requests can come to your server at a certain time, all right, from a certain user, let's say. Because if a single user is sending 100 requests literally like this within 2 seconds, it's very suspicious, and you want to lock these users out. You don't want them to be able to send this request anymore, because most likely it's a DOS attack. Now, there's a thing with a payload size. It's also might be an attack. A user might send 1 or 2 requests, not thousands, literally these 1 or 2, but the body of the request, let's say it's a post request, it would be huge, meaning it's not going to be like a couple of kilobytes, like a post request that you would normally see, but it would be literally hundreds of megabytes, which would theoretically bring your server down. So you really want to limit this by using some kind of a library, for example, rate limiter flexible, or just simply rate limiter. It also exists, but I actually like this one more. It's indeed more flexible, and you can simply use it like this and define how much rate limiting control you want to have over your user. All right. And by the way, about the second point, I just forgot to mention that if you want to kind of have a better control of your security related linting topics, you can actually use this ES plugin security package that integrates into your linter, and it's going to scream whenever you have these vulnerable basically points, such as importing modules with the user variable. All right. So let's go over to the next point, which is authentication limit. Again, it's very related to limiting, so basically to the third point and rate limiting in general, but now it's in the scope of authentication. All right. So let's say a user, or we have an authentication here, and one user tries to authenticate themselves. They give a wrong password and then they do it, let's say 10 seconds later. And then again, I'm pretty sure that you run into this problem as well, where you forgot your password, but you've given it too many times and then you got locked out. Actually, it's the best practice, and you want to do exactly that. So you can use, again, the rate limiter to pretty much define how much control you want to give the user when they're trying to authenticate. Let's say 10 false attempts and they're locked out at least for the next 5 or 8 hours. This is again a good practice, because otherwise the hacker can use a brute force attack and literally spam you with basically different passwords, and you don't want to let them do that. All right, the next point is HTTP response headers and using the Helmet package. This one is kind of a default, like in the Node realm, because almost everyone that I know, or almost every project that I know, is using Helmet. This is one of those gem packages that I would say, because it literally defines, and by default, it really defines all the headers, security-related headers that one would need. For example, to process isolate your page, to work over HTTPS and control DNS prefetching and so on. It literally can add as many security headers as you want, and of course you can extend it, but it already does a lot of stuff out of the box, so definitely go use it. It's literally adding one line here. Okay, don't forget about it. And last but not least, vulnerability inspection. Now, this one doesn't come across like smaller projects that often, because smaller projects, first of all, they're not, they're not using that many packages. But if your project is very, very big, as you know, our Node.js Node modules folder is like a couple gigabytes, meaning in the JavaScript ecosystem, every package depends on thousands of other packages, which is kind of interesting. All right, exactly for this case, we get a lot of vulnerability issues. Every day, every single day, I would even say every single hour, one of those packages in our Node modules gets a new vulnerability issue. Okay, and then these vulnerabilities have to be fixed before they're shipped into production. Well, in case if you are a B2C project or a B2C, you're building a B2C application, I would say maybe this is not too critical. Although if you're building like really like a fortified, strong, good quality application, you have to take care of that. But if you're especially a B2B product, meaning let's say you're building an application that's going to run on your B2B client's machine, then this is literally a must, and you need to make sure that your Node.js application or basically project doesn't contain any vulnerabilities. And how do you do that? Well, there are many tools to do that. The first one is actually the NPM audit. It's baked into the NPM, and you can run it like this. And if you do this in your project, you're probably going to see a lot of vulnerabilities. They also show up when you install them, the packages. So you either do it like fix them like this, whatever it can be fixed. If not, you literally need to play around with package versions and see and update them as much as you can. Another proprietary version or tool is actually Snyk, which you can use. I think it's paid, so it's more for like an enterprise solutions. But basically, you have a lot of options. You can even kind of configure a GitHub bot that is going to create pull requests as soon as there's a vulnerability in the project and so on. Okay, guys, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please subscribe so that you don't miss out part 3. And I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.